One D&D now has decided to change critical hits. And quite a significant change it is. Because now critical hits only apply to player characters and not to monsters controlled by the Dungeon Master or the non-player characters or NPCs. Which actually makes characters even stronger than they were before. And nerfs the monsters. Now, I have a personal bias with this, even though I probably play more than I Dungeon Master. Much to your surprise, I bet. I hate this, because this is a marketing thing. But their approach to put this out, although it is a marketing thing, it is also, I think their approach is going to be very much around true playtesting. They are going to be very careful about making this a change in the rules going forward, because they know it could sink them pretty badly. It's a rule that you could wind up having in a game that nobody uses, right? Not only have they said that only player characters can only critical hit, only weapon and unarmed strikes can critical hit, which again, it's actually favouring the martial classes. There's an attempt to try and rebalance here, but it's actually probably not necessary, because now spells can't critical hit. If you have an attack roll for a spell, and this is only critical hits will only work with an attack roll, whether it be a ranged attack, a melee attack, a spell attack at range, or a melee attack, it would only ever affect those, right? But now you can't actually critical hit with a spell that makes an attack roll, or a spell that has saving throws will never be affected. And probably the strongest spells in the game are the ones with a saving throw in terms of damage output. Right? They usually do the most. So now you have spells no longer hitting, no critical hit with a spell, and it's going to affect the weaker spells. Like essentially, single target spells are attack spells. Yep. It's going to affect any kind of attack roll spell, and again, they tend to be single target, and they tend to be the weakest spells out there. Not only that, most of the time when you're using these, it's going to be cantrips that are going to be affected. Cantrips don't actually do very much. Yes, there is a scaling process. You do get more dice as you level up, but it's still not going to make any significant difference compared to a martial class who's probably got, at later levels, 4 or 5 attacks. You know what I mean? They've got extra attack, so they've got even greater chance of being able to critical hit than a spellcaster. This was actually totally unnecessary by Wizards of the Coast. And I don't understand why they thought they needed to do this, because it doesn't rebalance things, really. No. The balance issue between martial and spellcasters is that spellcasters can do stuff outside of combat that's really cool, and martials often don't have those sorts of things. That's the real trouble, yeah? And martials can't usually affect great areas, and spellcasters can. Those are the key problems that people pull up, is like, we can't compete. Yes, understood. Only weapon dice are doubled now with a critical hit. So no sneak attack damage or smite damage. This definitely nerfs the rogue. It definitely nerfs the paladin critical hits. I'm going to say right now that they were pretty good at doing that sort of thing, and they could do it a lot. It is possible, if you rolled multiple critical hits on one turn with a paladin, to carve things up. A rogue, it was a lot more difficult. It was a lot more difficult to pump out the kind of damage. Paladins really just got hit pretty hard, and they were certainly exploited. You could hit a single target and take it down in one blow. If you critical hit and smite at the same time with your paladin, something would die. So I would say now what they've done, compared to everything else, they have made the critical hit rules even more complicated, significantly more complicated. It's kind of moronic, actually. Even if I agree with some of the concepts behind it, it's moronic because it just made it far more complicated with the changes they put in place. And it's not consistent with the design philosophy of 5e and the design philosophy that they have been saying they are putting forward, trying to keep it simple. So they've tried to make other things simpler, and this is one time when they haven't. Now, here's the answer they have had with regard to monsters. All monsters really going to get a recharge feature rather than being able to critical hit? No, they're not. I doubt it. It's very unlikely. Even in 4E, when we had recharge, it was not uncommon to forget to roll for the recharge or even realize that you had a recharge ability. I mean, that is an issue with regard to dungeon mastering, maybe my dungeon mastering. But not every monster is going to have a recharge feature. So you can't present that as an argument as a balance aspect. The other thing that they've mentioned is the reason for doing this is that if players are low level, they can be killed by a critical hit by a monster. Yes, they can, but how long are you level 1, level 2, or level 3? This is really the danger zone, is level 1, level 2, and level 3. If you're going to die in 5e or any Dungeons & Dragons game that's played currently, it's probably in those levels. And after that, you're probably not. So, and here's the thing. There are easier ways to deal with the fact that you don't want your characters to die, if that's what you want to do as a dungeon master. So, not only that, you've actually made the process of a monster affecting the scale of a combat significantly harder. Like, it's harder to challenge your players because you do this. We all know this. Now, no dungeon master is going to agree to this new change in critical hits. As it sits, I find it very unlikely there'd be a tiny population of dungeon masters who will agree to the critical hits the way they have presented them, unless they are a Dungeons & Dragons Adventurers League dungeon master, and they won't have a choice. If this becomes print, which it hasn't become print yet, and they are testing the waters very much, okay? Players that like playing Paladins and Rogues will hate this new change to critical hits. It is going to annoy the player base significantly. So the feedback on this is probably not going to be very positive. I also want to point out that why does a Paladin smite ability have to be powered by something like spell slots and then interact with a critical hit? Is there no better way to deal with a Paladin smite ability? There is, I'm sure there is. They just haven't put it forward. There's no point having spell slots if the only thing you ever use it on is smiting. So they just need to retool the Paladin to make that work. Now, I'm going to say that I think the Rogue got the short end of the stick. A Rogue is significantly nerfed by not being able to double the sneak attack damage dice. And they only get one attack, generally, unless you multi-class. And there is a tendency by people to multi-class into Paladin for the smite and into Rogue for the sneak attack because of the interplay with the critical hit. Like, it's done deliberately. And then if you can find some way of improving your critical range, then that's even better. I've seen it happen. People have built those sorts of characters at my table. It does exist. So messing with those two classes might actually be a very sensible thing to do, and maybe the way that they deal with that is we get a playtest that retools them to compensate for the problem. But again, it's too late because players will be already pissed off by it and they are not going to say yes to this. I would say that the best way to deal with a critical hit is actually to leave it the way it was, but make this one change, and that is critical hits need to just do maximum damage. Skip the doubling the dice mechanic so that people get consistent, reliable damage results, like they did in 4E. It's a mechanic from 4E. I know a lot of people don't like that, but it means you don't need to worry about, I just rolled a critical hit. I rolled my 2 dice. I'm doubling my dice in this case, and I roll 1 on all of my dices. And you go and tell a dungeon master that you did 2 points of damage off the dice, and 3 points of damage off your modifier, and you just made a critical hit, and the total damage was 5. And it's depressing as. And it does happen. I've seen it happen. Just make it consistent. I can assure you that power gamers, when they can deal with consistent rules, they actually probably prefer that over things that have lots of variable aspects to them, and actually it makes it super simple. Super simple. Here's the other problem is so many people are using different types of critical hit rules right now that aren't the standard official ones, that you cannot go and mess with it this much and not wind up finding that nobody uses it anyway. So I can tell you now, there's no way that the critical hit rules are going to survive the playtest round 1. I doubt it very much.